Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Earth 2 podcast, a podcast where we explore the origins and development of the DC Comics multiverse and the legacy of their Golden Age characters throughout the Silver and the Bronze Ages of comics. I'm Peter Watson.
And I'm David Steele. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Now, this episode has been a while in the coming or the planning, hasn't it?
Oh yes, oh yes.
One of our Twitter followers, Multiverse Historian, has been requesting an episode about these characters, and it's finally arrived. This is our Inferior 5 episode.
Woohoo!
If you listened last week, we did issue 121 of the Doom Patrol, and published on the same day was the final issue of the Inferior 5's ongoing book. Final new issue, we should say. Issue 10, published on 18th of July, 1968. So we're doing something a little different this week. Kind of in the same pattern as we did when we did our MF Enterprises Captain Marvel episode.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than read any of the stories from the Inferior 5 series, we're going to take a leisurely stroll through the series and highlight some of the stuff which we think means that it kind of falls into our criteria.
Yes.
There's a lot of references and a lot of fun, interesting stuff throughout.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end, we're going to speculate a little bit about what Earth they might be on.
Indeed, yes.
And that sort of thing. So, Pete, say, when did you first encounter the Inferior 5?
The Inferior 5 was definitely in Showcase issue 100.
Right.
I was fascinated by them then, I'll be honest. I love Showcase issue 100. It's one of my favourite single issues of all time. I think I've said that before on the podcast as well.
Yes, one we were looking very much forward to doing.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, they're really fascinating characters then. So I had that first, and then I think possibly after that it was Merryman's appearance in Animal Man.
Yeah.
That's probably my next exposure to them, really. After that, I kind of tracked down a lot of the issues. This is probably late 80s, early 90s. I managed to track down most of the series. I'm still missing a couple. But I've had these, I read them at the time, but to be honest, I've not really gone back to them. So my memory of them is really distant.
Right.
I literally just had to skim through some of these in preparation for this episode. So, yes. What about yourself?
I can't remember. I mean, I remember seeing Merryman in that issue of Animal Man, but I didn't read that issue of Animal Man until about late 92, early 93, probably most likely.
All right.
I have a feeling it must have been at some point in that period in the early 90s when I decided I'm going to collect DC Comics and be committed to them for the rest of my life. I think it must have been around then. I've no idea because it's not like they turned up in any of the JLA Jesse crossovers. It's not like they featured in a Brave and the Bold or DC Comics Presents or anything. I can't remember. Listeners, if you can remember when I first encountered the Inferior 5, do write in and let us know. So, the Inferior 5. It's an interesting comic. It's a humour comic, essentially, isn't it? It's more like Binky or Windy and Wonky or whatever they're all called. The DC attempts at doing Archie. It's very much more like those, I think, than anything else. It's also quite similar in tone and its irreverence to Marvel's Not Brand Ech. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Not Brand Ech, that was a Marvel satirical series, very much in the vein of Mad magazine, except mostly creating parody versions of their own heroes. They also did some parodies of DC heroes, or DC characters, which they refer to as Brand X in their letter pages, usually in Marvel. And that's why this was called Not Brand Ech. Because they're basically saying they're Marvel. Yeah, see? So it's quite fun.
I've got a couple of issues of Not Brand Ech. I've also got the Masterwork.
Yep, me too.
Which was very, very expensive, but, you know, it was a complete run, the Not Brand Ech with a nice hardback. You're not going to refuse that. Anyway,
no.
I don't think I'd actually consciously read an Inferior 5 comic before we started our prep for this, but we shall see how we get on. So what we're going to do this week, listeners, is we're going to jump through each issue of Inferior 5 as it comes, give you the publication dates as we go, and we're just going to talk about anything in those issues that we liked that's relevant to our mission statement, anything worth highlighting, and we'll see how we go. So, the Inferior 5, they first appeared in issue 62 of Showcase, published on the 24th of March 1966. Pete C, do you have that aforementioned issue of Showcase?
It is right in my hand, yes.
He's honing it up, listeners. Can you see? Look, check it out.
Exciting.
So we're introduced in this story to a chap called Myron Victor, and he's the son of the Patriot and Lady Liberty of the Freedom Brigade. So straight away, we're introduced to a whole bunch of other superheroes, the previous generation to the Inferior 5. So that immediately makes you think, right, we haven't seen any of these people before. Which earth are they on, so to speak? I'll give you some descriptions of the Freedom Brigade because we get a really good shot of them at one point. Patriot looks like a cross between Uncle Sam and Superman. He looks very much like Uncle Sam, but he's got a cape.
Yeah.
There's Captain Swift, who looks very much like the Flash. A couple of detailings are different. There's the Bowman, who's obviously based in Green Arrow, but has a touch of the Spy Smasher to him.
Yes.
There's Princess Power, see if you can guess who she's based on. Mr. Might, who is a kind of weird Superman Flash costume combination. And then there's the Mermaid, who reminded me very much of Tarzak from the MF Enterprises Captain Marvel.
Yes, she does look very much like Tarzan.
With the fins on the head and all that.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
And so basically this story involves the Patriot instigating a gathering of the children of superheroes to deal with a threat to the city that they live in. Myron visits an establishment called the Heroic Costume Shop, where he gets outfitted as Merryman, and then very quickly we meet the rest of the Inferior Five, who are the Blimp, Awkwardman, White Feather, and Dumb Bunny. And in this story they go up against a chap called Dr. Gruesome. Petesy, what's your thoughts on the first appearance of the Inferior Five?
Yeah, it's a really good setup. I love the new characters. The Blimp is Captain Swift's son, and he's basically the opposite of what you would expect the Flash to be.
Yes.
Because he's slow. He can fly, but basically he's quite a large, fat chap. And he's wearing a green costume with a Zeppelin as a logo on the front. And he's got this interesting headgear which actually looks like the tail fins of a Zeppelin, which is quite fun. Mm-hmm. His powers are he basically can float. He can't really fly, he just kind of can float. Then we have Awkwardman, who is dressed very much in a dark blue, sort of Batman-like costume with the same sort of cowl, but with floppier ears, to be honest, and he's got an A logo on his belt. And he's the son of Mr. Might and the Mermaid. His name, obviously Awkwardman, is both an explanation of just how clumsy he is, and also a play on the name Aquaman, because obviously he's the son of the Mermaid.
Yeah.
Then we have White Feather, who's the son of the Bowman, and he is an archer, funnily enough. And he's wearing a very kind of Green Arrow costume, except it's actually kind of orangey brown.
Yeah.
And he's got a white feather in his cap, funnily enough. And finally, we have Dumb Bunny, and she's the daughter of Princess Power. And she's wearing basically a bunny girl outfit, except it's red. She's got the initials DB in her belt, and she's got the bunny ears in her hair.
She's probably my favourite character, and not in a kind of pervy type way. She's just really funny because she's this sort of probably incredibly politically incorrect dumb blonde. They probably wouldn't do her now, I think, to be honest. You know, they'd probably make her much more ironic and a bit cleverer, really play up it was all an act. Merryman's costume, he looks like a sort of court jester, really, doesn't he?
Yes, imagine Woody Allen cosplaying Harley Quinn.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
There's no statement that they're on a particular Earth at any point in this series, but it's very interesting that there are analogues of some very familiar superheroes right at the start, so that maybe does suggest that maybe on their own Earth. So
there's some nice fun moments where the Dr. Gruesome creates this robot. It's made out of bathtubs and an old wireless and a go-kart and all sorts of bits and pieces that the team have to take down. It's quite ridiculous, and I do love it. It's fantastic.
The team made their second appearance in issue 63 of Showcase, published on the 24th of May 1966, and this is the one with their Incredible Hulk parody, essentially.
Yes.
Dr. Gruesome comes back, bringing some pals with him. The Sparrow, the Speed Demon, the Masked Swastika, the less said about him the better, and the Silver Sorceress, which is another name that DC will use again.
Yes.
This is when we first get a proper look at the Inferior Five's secret identities. Myron, who is Merryman, he works as a cartoonist. Herman, who is the Blimp, he works as a chef. There's some really funny stuff in some of the stories with his diner.
Yeah.
Leander Brett, who is Awkwardman, he works as a beachcomber. Now, is there anything more, can you think of anything more late 60s as an occupation? Actually, you can, because William King, who is White Feather, he's a photographer, which is also an incredibly late 60s occupation. What I liked about him in this issue is he wears a shirt that makes him look very much like Stripesy.
Mm-hmm.
We also learned that Dumb Bunny's real name is Athena Tremor, and she's a model. So that's another incredibly late 60s occupation, and she's very much like, it's a very cheesecake, I suppose is the way you put it, as an approach to some of the time she appears. This issue, Dr. Gruesome, the baddie from the first appearance, comes back. There's a big fight between the Inferior Five and his gang of baddies, and it involves a boxer called Brute Brainyard who gets struck with some radiation that comes from this grenade thing that's been built with Dr. Gruesome, and he becomes sort of the Man Mountain, which is basically a Hulk parody. So straight away in the second issue we're getting a riff on a very established Marvel superhero at this point. And it's quite funny because Merryman takes him down by tapping him in the jaw. So that obviously ties into his the boxer having a glass jaw type situation. So Petesy, what's your thoughts on their second issue?
Really enjoyed it. I think, to be honest, my favourite part is actually the splash page, because you have in the distance the villains in the Man Mountain walking towards our heroes. And Merryman says, "Don't let those 5 supervillains scare you. After all, What other crime-fighting combo has members who are swifter, smarter, and tougher than we are? And the Blimp says, well, let's see. There's the Justice League. Awkwardman says, the Doom Patrol. White Feather says, the Teen Titans. And Dumb Bunny says, the Campfire Girls. Which just is really fascinating because obviously they're establishing that these characters know about these other superhero teams.
Yes. Basically, they're making the point that all of the other superhero teams are better than they are.
Yes, including the Campfire Girls.
Yeah. We should really emphasise these stories are really, really enjoyable.
Yes,
They're very funny. They are very charming. They're completely unlike anything else that's going on in any of the other DC superhero comics at this time. They really are very special. So the team turned up again in issue 65 of Showcase. Of course, issue 64 featured our pal the Spectre. Issue 65 published on the 22nd of September 1966. And this is an interesting one because the Inferior 5 get employed as teachers at Dean Egghead's Academy for Superheroes. And this is the X-Men parody issue. But of course, they're not called the X-Men, they're called the Eggs-Men. E-double-G-S. And this is tremendous because we basically meet analogues of the first 5 original X-Men. We meet Harry McElhinney instead of Hank McCoy, and he's the ape, very grotesque, sort of exaggerated features. We meet Irish Autumns instead of Scott Summers, and he's called Basilisk, and he he shoots I-beams, right? It's quite obvious what's going on there. Melvin Murgatroyd the 14th, who is Icarus, and that's obviously inspired by Warren Worthington III, aka the Angel. The next one's quite funny. Billy Gander, instead of Bobby Drake, and he is called Winter Wonderlad. And then finally, we have Penelope Pink, who is Levitation Lass.
Yes.
And that tickled me as well, so instead of Jean Grey. And our heroes in this issue come up against, instead of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, they come up against the Fraternity of Atavistic No Goodniks. They're led by Dr. Dinosaur, and have members including Frogman, Angelfish, Mr. Amoeba, and Pteranodon Juan. There's a funny reference to the Clancy Street gang. So yeah, I mean, straight away, 3rd issue, and we're getting the X-Men parody.
Yeah.
Very, very funny. The names are hilarious. Thoughts then, Pizzi?
Yes, I really enjoyed it. The twist in this is that the team aren't mutants. They're actually genetic throwbacks. They're not Homo superior. They're throwbacks to a previous age. Like Dean Egghead has got telepathy, but that's because he's a throwback to a time when man couldn't communicate through language. It's fascinating.
Yeah. So
much fun. I must say here, the artwork is phenomenal.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Mike Sekowsky in this, and it's very, very different from the Mike Sekowsky we've seen in Justice League. It's very cartoony, a lot of fun. All these stories, by the way, are by E. Nelson Bridwell. The first couple of stories were drawn by Joe Orlando, and they were great.
Yeah.
But I think Mike Sekowsky is just having so much fun.
Yeah.
The panels seem huge in this, but there's still tons of panels on the page, but it just seems to have a much bigger scope.
Yeah.
There's a really funny scene where Awkwardman tries to leap a tall building in a single bound.
Yes.
There's 2 long panels as he leaps up, but he misses and he crashes through the window.
Yeah. A sequence, I think, which was completely ripped off by the Shazam movie, let's be honest.
Yeah, yes.
In the power training montage. So yeah, I wonder if they read the Inferior 5 when they were preparing Shazam.
May well have done. But yeah, lots of fun. And that's Showcase issues, sensational.
Yep. 3 issues of Showcase, just like the Spectre. And then, of course, just like the Spectre, they got their own ongoing series. Issue 1, published on the 24th of January, 1967. Now, this is the issue that takes the mickey out of The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Oh, yes.
Instead of Uncle, we spell out competent organisation utilising scientific investigation for national fiend, ruffian and evildoer defence. And what does that spell?
Cousin Fred.
Get it? Cousin Fred, Uncle, you see?
There we are.
It's glorious. This is the issue where we find out that Merryman's granddad was called Yellow Jacket, and he was assisted by someone called Plato, so that's obviously a riff on the Green Hornet.
Yep, and Kato, fantastic.
I can't remember if the Avengers Yellow Jacket appeared by that point.
There was a Golden Age Yellow Jacket anyway.
Yes, of course, yeah. I'm just wondering, from a Silver Age point of view, I think Hank Pym's version probably had done at that point. We meet the 2 key members of Cousin Fred. Instead of Napoleon Solo, we meet a guy called Caesar Single. And instead of Ulia Kuriakin, we meet a chap whose first name is Quitcha and his surname is Bellyaching. And the big joke in this one, of course, is they're trying to defeat the evil forces of Hurricane, who are spelt out as the heinous, unscrupulous rats and rogues initiating criminal anarchy and nefarious evil. So there we go. Issue 1 is The Man from U.N.C.L.E. parody. What are your thoughts on issue 1?
I really enjoyed it. I'm a big Man from U.N.C.L.E. fan, actually.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, the actual images of Mr. Waverley, Napoleon and Delia, I'll call them by, they're actually...
Yes.
They're amazing. Absolutely amazing. It's just great caricatures of them. Yeah, phenomenal.
Yeah, based on Robert Vaughan and David McCallum and whatever the other chap's name is, I can't remember.
Leo G. Carroll.
Yeah, it was a real surprise reading that, actually. These books are very clever. It's not just cheap gags, it's very well thought out. It's quite a sophisticated sort of level of humour that's going on.
Yeah.
I wonder how much of it went over the heads of the audience. I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
Not a kid's funny book by any stretch, I don't think.
Definitely not aimed at kids, I think. It is aimed more, as Marvel was, sort of at the college crowd, at the teenagers, the older readers, so yeah.
Yeah. So, issue 1 is the U.N.C.L.E. parody. Issue 2, published on the 16th of March 1967. This is an interesting one because we meet some more Marvel analogues in this one. We meet a guy called George M. Coldham, who composes fight songs for superheroes. Now, George M. Coldham, I couldn't work out who that was referencing. Could you work out who that was referencing?
No, I don't know.
I'm not sure if it's supposed to be another famous songwriter of the time. It might be completely obvious. It might come to me in a dream one night. Listeners, if you know, please let us know. So he basically writes fight songs for superheroes. He turns up because he wants to punt one to the Inferior 5. And we learn that he has written for other superhero teams, including the Justice League of America, the Doom Patrol, the Challengers of the Unknown, the Teen Titans, the Sea Devils, the Legion of Superheroes, and we actually do see Invisible Kid make a tiny one-panel cameo. He's written for the Metal Men, and he's written for the Blackhawks. So that's quite interesting, name-checking a whole bunch of other teams that we haven't had mentioned yet. Some of them that have been, so... Again, this, if you want, tells us that this universe that these comics are taking place in have some other teams and characters that we're familiar with. Our team need a new HQ, as everyone knows their meeting place is the one that their parents used. And Merryman sees an advertisement for offices to rent in the Batson building, which works on a couple of levels because it's obviously a reference to the Fantastic Four's Baxter building, but also references Billy Batson, the original Captain Marvel. We meet Fantastic Four analogues, Rod Rickard, Sophie and Bjorn Anderson, and Jerry Drizzle.
Is Bjorn Anderson not an ABBA?
That's a different podcast. Rod's a scientist, and his machine blows up, and he turns them all into the Fantastic Four.
Yes.
Their names are quite amusing, obviously riffing on the Fantastic Four characters. So we have Mr. Man Plastic, Matchstick Kid, Vanishing Queen, and Whatchamacallit, which is my favourite probably because it's the thing. They and the Inferior 5 battle a couple of characters that are obviously based on Giant Man and the Wasp, a guy called King Size and his sidekick, the terrible Tsetse Fly. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly.
Yes.
They beat them and they have a big fight amongst themselves. But what's really interesting about this story, it ties into some of the stuff that we've done already on the podcast, is that Plastic Man makes an appearance. And this is where we should say that Mr. Man Plastic, as he appears in this, and I'm sure it's deliberate, is very, very like the MF Enterprises Plastic Man.
He is indeed.
Who had black hair and wore a green and black unitard, because Mr. Man Plastic, as he appears in issue 2 of Inferior 5, looks very much like him. And when Plastic Man appears, he grabs a hold of Mr. Man Plastic and complains that he's sick and fed up of all the copyists, which I thought was genius. Absolutely hilarious.
Yep.
That he's rocking up and sort of commenting, I think, clearly on what MF Enterprises were doing. It was brilliant.
Yeah. He might also be commenting on the Robbie Deed Plastic Man as well, when he turned into Plastic Man.
Yeah, and possibly even Ralph Dibney and possibly the actual Reed Richards as well. It's very interesting.
Yep, true. This is a fantastic issue. It's so much fun again. As you mentioned, this composer had written for all these other superhero teams before. What's fascinating is he actually sings them in the actual story, and it tells you very much in Mad Magazine style what tune to sing it to.
Yes.
For example, the Teen Titans one is to On Wisconsin. Over There is the tune you have to sing the Doom Patrol song to. Song of the Vagabonds is the one for Justice League. I
wasn't too familiar immediately with a lot of the songs they reference. It's maybe a gap in my education.
I'm aware of them, but I don't really know how they go. The main one we'll probably know is the Stars and Stripes Forever, and that's Legion of Superheroes one. But certainly you could probably Google or YouTube them and find out how the songs go.
Yeah.
But it's great fun. It reminds me of a young version of the fiddler, to be honest, because when he turns up, the first thing he basically does is he whip out a double bass and then it's a fiddle. So, and I thought, could it be this world's version of the fiddler, pretty much?
Interesting. That's going to give people ideas.
Tons of fun. And of course, just the look of King Size as well. It looks really goofy. I really enjoyed that as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So, that's issue 2. Issue 3, published on the 18th of May, 1967. This is the Tarzan parody issue.
Mm-hmm.
As a Burroughs fan, I was quite amused by this. Not least of all because Trantor the elephant is renamed Tantrum, which is a brilliant joke.
Superb.
Instead of Tarzan, he's called Darwin, and instead of John Clayton, he's John Claypool, and he's Lord Gravestone instead of Lord Greystoke. Instead of the fabled lost city of Opar, there's the fabled lost city of Oompa, which really made me laugh as well. So, issue 3, the Tarzan parody. Nothing really that ties in anything else really to any of the other DC or Marvel characters, but as a Burroughs fan, I enjoyed that one immensely.
Yeah, I do like that his jungle headquarters is a treehouse that he built, get ready for this, listeners, under a full moon.
Take a drink.
So there we are.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm going to try and research these. I'm going to try and seek out a proper low-grade copy of that as a Tarzan fan. I think I'd quite like to have that in my collection. Listeners, if you're feeling generous, you know what to do.
One of the things I love about this issue is there's a text page that says the fanatical fans squawk. And instead of publishing letters, what they've done is they've published a poem from a fan called Saga of the Inferior 5. Now, this takes up the entire page.
Right.
And it's quite amusing. I'm not going to read it out just now, but the poem is actually written by future comic writer Bill Mantlo.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. I might put this up in the socials, actually, so you can read it. So, yeah, that's a lovely bonus. I mean, the Tarzan story is fantastic, but this kind of blew my mind when I read it, because it's just so good, and he's got so much love for the title, and he's so talented. A nice little bonus for the readers there.
So issue 4 then, published on the 18th of July 1967, and this is the Thor issue, where we meet this version of Thor, who's not like the Marvel version of Thor in any way whatsoever. No. He's red-haired with a beard and his hair's pleated. Odin sends some Valkyries to get some new heroes, and they get the Inferior 5. Loki turns up as well. Loads of Asgardian stuff. Lots of fun, basically. Thor parody issue. Pete C, what's your thoughts?
I think possibly my favourite thing about this is... It's, again, genuinely really funny, but there's a chariot driven by 2 giant house cats in it, which I find absolutely hilarious. Just the artwork on that panel. As someone who has 2 house cats that are not giant, that really touched me. I really enjoyed it, yeah. Cool.
It's not as quite as, referencing Thor and all that. They're having a bit more fun. It's not quite as on the nose as the Fantastic Four and Hulk parodies.
Yeah.
Thor comes back.
And it's worth saying as well that in the letters page for that one, there is a letter from, again, future comic pro Mark Evanier.
Oh, right. Cool.
So yes, all of the future comic writers seem to love Inferior 5.
Interesting, because he was obviously, in my experience, associated with quite a few sort of humour books. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, Guru writer.
Issue 5 then, published on the 19th of September 1967. The Inferior 5 end up in Paris during the French Revolution, and instead of meeting the Scarlet Pimpernel, they encounter the Crimson Chrysanthemum. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. There's no superhero analogues or anything, but it's a very fun and enjoyable story.
There's a character in this one called Sir Chauncey Barclay, who kind of looks like a colourful version of the Earth 2 villain, the Wizard, which quite amused me, although he has a monocle. A combination between the Wizard and the character of the monocle, actually, now that I think of it.
Maybe he's their illegitimate child, somehow. Issue 6, this is a deep one.
Here we go.
This is one of these ones we're very grateful for the diligent research that's gone on in Mike's Amazing World of Comics and for identifying a lot of the people that pop up in this issue. So issue 6 published, on the 23rd of November 1967 on Doctor Who's 4th anniversary. Right, a lot to go through in this one. The Inferior 5 introduced the comic saying that they've had requests for a complete examination of how an issue of the magazine is produced. The requests apparently come from the editor, writer and artist. It's all very fourth wall breaking.
Yes.
What I like most about this... There's a scene with some placard carrying hippies outside the DC Comics offices, and one of them has a sign that says make war, not comics. So yes, we basically meet Johnny DC. They don't name him as such, but it's obvious who he is. But we follow Johnny DC as he goes to visit Jack Miller, who's the editor. And basically the rest of the issue is essentially a caper through the DC offices. We encounter several DC staff members in no particular order. Jack Miller, Irwin Donfield, E. Nelson Bridwell, as Pete says, the writer,
Yep.
Barbara Friedlander, Robert Kanigher, Shakes Fist,
Right.
Julie Schwartz himself, Mort Weisinger, George Kashdan, Murray Boltonoff, Mike Sikowski, Carmine Infantino, Mike Esposito, Jack Schiff, Jack Adler, Saul Harrison, Gail Kane, and Joe, I hope I'm pronouncing this properly, Lateres. And we also get cameos from Robin, Batman, and very briefly Stanley's Monster, which I thought was pretty cool. I've got a couple of issues of Stanley's Monster, including one when he wears Superman's uniform on the cover.
Excellent.
So that's a lot of fun. Issue 6, amazing. Just to see so many DC folk being represented. What's your thoughts on issue 6, Peter?
Yeah, it's very inside baseball, for lack of a better expression. As we said earlier on, this isn't written for kids. This is written for a slightly more mature audience.
Yeah, a very savvy audience that knows what's
Late
going
teens,
on.
yeah. It feels very much like a reaction to the Marvel bullpen.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And how that was portrayed in Marvel comics. It's almost like, well, if they can do that, then this is DC. This is what we're doing. And hey, look, we're fun too, kids. You know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fascinating, and it's a really cool concept. And to be honest, we've mentioned before in the show a few times when we have had comic pros turn up in stories.
Yes.
And this one is egregious.
Yes.
The entire reason for this issue is that, and it's phenomenal. It's great fun.
Yeah. This is the point where we speculate about Earth Prime being involved, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
We've gone with that conceit that whenever a writer or artist or editor pops up, that's their versions in Earth Prime. You know, it's probably not really, breaking the fourth wall, but we're buying into it because it lets us cover a couple more comics here and there that we might not have done.
Indeed.
Which is obviously why we chose issue 121 of Doom Patrol to highlight that series, because of the cameos. It just adds a whole other level to the whole series, a whole level of self-referential type cleverness, I think, and it works really, really well.
It certainly does. And also the cover is astounding.
Yep.
Because it's a plain white cover. You've got the Inferior 5 in the middle, and they're surrounded by a whole horde of DC heroes. You've got Batman, Robin, Aquaman, Flash, Martian Manhunter, Hawkman, you've got Plastic Man there, Green Lantern, the Atom, the Metal Men are there, Black Hawk's there, I think that's Robot Man in the back there. You've got Superman and Superboy. They shouldn't be together.
Right.
That shouldn't happen.
Uh-huh.
And they're all surrounding the Inferior 5 on this amazing cover. It is beautiful.
It's a cracker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so look forward to the cover of issue 6 when it goes up on the socials, if it hasn't done so already. We move on then to issue 7. Oof, this is a dense one as well. Published on the 23rd of January 1968. So, to summarise, an abortive and backfiring attempt to save an old lady from being mugged sees the Inferior 5 follow the mugger into the sewer system. Among the people they meet in the sewers are Thor, to whom they give a makeover. Thor that they met a couple of issues ago. It's saying he ends up blonde. And soon after they meet a character called Prince Nabob, who is obviously referencing the Submariner, Prince Namor, and he pulls the plug in the sewer, which gets rid of an alligator and some sharks and an ugly mermaid that were hassling them all. He is given the name the Submoron instead of the Submariner. And the Submoron is looking for Thor on behalf of someone called Stanley. Just spelled Stnley. Yes, do you see what they did there? Soon after they meet the Submoron, they meet a guy called Iron Pants, who's obviously based on Iron Man, and he's also looking for Thor on behalf of Stanley. And in rapid succession, the Inferior 5 see a bunch of characters, including Mickey Mouse, Spy vs. Spy from the Mad Comics, Stanley and his monster, the Fox and Crow, and they meet someone called the Cobweb Kid. And he's also looking for Thor on behalf of Stanley. There is some actual plot in the story, including Dr. Diabolical, but we're not really going to talk too much about that, really. The old lady from the start is revealed to be the Cobweb Kid's Aunt Meg. So full on with the Marvel references again in issue 7. It's astonishing.
I know.
I was not expecting any of this in this. It's phenomenal stuff.
Again, the letters page has got a letter in it from a future comic pro, Carl Gafford, this time.
Right, cool.
I think my favourite bit of this is possibly when the Submoron appears and he's trying to remember his catchphrase.
Yes.
He's basically shouting out, Tyrannosaurus Rex. That doesn't sound right. Oedipus Rex. Rex Harrison.
Yep.
It's hilarious.
It's brilliant, and if you know Namor, they're assuming that everyone that's reading this comic is going to be familiar with the characters that they've been lampooning. It's very clever. The references to Stanley are incredibly on the nose. They're very, very funny.
Yeah, if this was your first comic, you would be lost completely.
Yes. It feels very postmodern in a way. It's casting a wink to the viewer, the reader, the listener,
Absolutely,
whatever.
yes.
They're hoping that the reader's going to get what they're talking about. Maybe more so than DC trying to do Not Brand X. This is DC trying to do Mad more than anything else, isn't it?
Yes, I would entirely agree with that. And at one point, the Inferior Five are imprisoned in giant bell jars, which, in a callback to last week's episode, there was a famous scene in a Grant Morrison Doom Patrol issue where the Negative Spirit was encased in a spirit-proof bell jar.
That's a nice coincidence. We couldn't have planned that if we tried. Gosh.
There you go.
Yeah.
No, I love that. That's created by the Character Quiz. It's from the Brotherhood of Dada. Again, one of my favourite stories. As I said last week, Grant's Doom Patrol is A-list for me. So yeah, I know it so well.
I was talking to Vincent earlier today, and he's offering to lend me the Grant stuff that I haven't read. I am resolving to read some more Doom Patrol off the back of those 2 episodes that we've done recently. I know, it will happen.
Yay, cool.
So we're on to issue 8 now, published on the 21st of March, 1968. 23 years to the day before my high school leavers dance. There we go. An interesting one, this. Megalopolis, which is sort of revealed as the city that it seems everything's taking place in, has been swamped in junk. The 5 get involved when Herman, aka the Blimp, his diner is caught in the mess. Basically, the whole city's just been swamped in rubbish and trash and what have you. Dr. Gruesome, who was last seen in Showcase 63, he's at the top of the rubbish pile, and he has a plan to attack the United Nations with an atomic egg. And needless to say, he's foiled. Nothing too much else for me to say about issue 8, Pete.
No, this is a weird one. This is almost like a Plastic Man story. There's less actual parody of things in it. It's more just, let's just do a fun comedy superhero thing with maybe a little touch of social commentary about the junk.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really have the same kind of flavour as the rest of the series. At least so far anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely the most sort of linear and sort of plot-driven of them. Yeah, as you say, there's no parody stuff going on. It's like, what if the Inferior Five didn't have the parody stuff in it at all and was a straightforward, funny superhero comic? It's still very good, though. The artwork's gorgeous.
Yeah.
We talked recently when we were doing some issues of the Spectre, and you were sort of seeing how Jerry Grandinetti's work reminded you of some of the EC comics. I mean, there's a similar sort of level of detail, I think, to some of the stuff in issue 8.
Yeah, definitely.
It's slightly cartoony and caricatured, but the quality of the illustration is phenomenal.
It's Win Mortimer's the artist on it at that time.
All right.
They've had a few artists.
We move on now to issue 9, published on the 16th of May, 1968. And again, another one without any parody elements, very straightforward story. A jewel is stolen from a museum by aliens who need it to charge their mind-controlled devices. There we go. That's my one-sentence summary of issue 9. Pete, say anything to add?
Yeah, again, this issue is... It's fun and it's entertaining, but it doesn't drag you in the way the earlier issues did, as if you were in on the joke.
Yeah.
It's more like, here's a joke. It's fine, but it just doesn't grip you quite as much. There's an interesting bit where Dumb Bunny has to kiss Awkwardman to get him out of this trance that he's in. And a good comedic bit where he kind of like floats up in the air and bangs his head after it happens because he's kind of swept off his feet.
Yeah.
As I said, it's kind of by the numbers, not hugely exciting.
I was sort of wondering by this point if Dumb Bunny was a sort of play on sort of, the Goldie Hawn sort of persona.
Very much so, I think, yeah. Huh?
That sort of open mouth, finger at the chin, sort of dumb blonde sort of caricature, I suppose.
Yeah.
Issue 9. Look out for the cover on the socials. So we now arrive at issue 10, which, as I said at the top, was published the same day as Doom Patrol, issue 121. Now, I've written a slightly more detailed summary for this one.
Yes.
Earth is invaded by little green aliens and a call goes out for superheroes. And as well as the Inferior Five, we see clearly Superman, we see the Submoron again, the Cobweb Kid again, and the Cookie Quartet, which is the name that they gave to the Fantastic Four equivalents when they appeared. And they basically look like the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, literally.
And obviously the Cookie Quartet is a reference to Captain America's team in the Avengers when it's him and Hawkeye and Wanda and Quicksilver. That's another reference there. But they look like the Fantastic Four. Whatchamacallit looks like the Thing this time. You know, he's not the brown lumpy, he's the orange rocky guy. They're all wearing the blue outfits, so that joke is much more on the nose.
But they've got a Q for Quartet as opposed to a 4 on their logo. That's the only difference, really.
Yeah. The bulk of the comic is taken up with a lot of nonsense involving the Marvel parody heroes. Because the aliens have powers of hypnotic suggestion, which they use against the Marvel heroes and the Inferior Five, they can't stop the aliens Thankfully, of course, Superman spots what's going on whilst he's having another battle of his own and draws the aliens away by creating a vacuum. And he does it at such a speed that no one can see him. He returns the aliens to their spaceship and they leave. And then the series finishes with the five breaking out of their hypnotic state that the aliens put them in, and the Marvel analogues waiting to cover them in tar, paint and feathers. They're like hiding round the corner. The final panel is glorious. They're all waiting just to ambush them and mix them up. So that's how it goes out. The great thing about it is just that it's so clearly Spidey and the FF this time.
Yeah, there's no dubiety.
Yeah.
I do like how the Cobweb Kid is basically quite paunchy.
Yes.
That's always quite amusing to me. This is back to the proper parody
Yes.
of what we had before, and it's all the better for it, to be honest. It kind of reminds me of the Skrulls, the aliens coming in.
I can see that.
Very much in that sort of look. But I think my favourite thing in it isn't anything to do with the parody of the characters or any of the Marvel analogues or Superman turning up. I think it's when the aliens first land and there's a cow there and the cow goes moo, and there's a wee asterisk that gives you a translation that says, yow, a flying saucer. Then he says moo again in the next panel, and again asterisk saying, I better blow. Saucers mean food, and food means steak, and that means me. So, and he basically starts to dig a hole and try and hide in this hole.
Yeah.
And then the third panel he goes moo again, and that means they've got horns, but they ain't my people. It's hilarious, genuinely hilarious. I love those three panels.
It's cracking stuff.
And it's just so much fun.
Yep.
And obviously when the Skrulls first debuted in the Fantastic Four story, at the end of that story, they were hypnotised into turning into cows.
Yes.
And I wonder if that's a wee subtle reference there. I'm probably reading far too much into this, but I wonder if that's a subtle reference there as well.
That's it then for the Inferior 5 as far as their ongoing book.
Yeah.
They revived briefly for a couple of reprint issues in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And as Peter said at the top, we see them in issue 100 of Showcase, so we will see them again in the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We're now going to have a little light-hearted debate about which Earth the Inferior 5 could be on. The presence of people like Superman, so clearly Superman, the references to like Invisible Kid and the Challengers, makes me think that in a way this is the regular Earth 1, but seen through a filter.
Interesting. Okay.
In the same way that Torchwood was set in the same universe as Doctor Who, but had a lot more sexy stuff than Doctor Who ever did.
There we are.
Same universe, different feel to the stories. But the appearance of all the Marvel characters,
Yeah.
you know, the Marvel-esque characters, obviously heightened, obviously parodies, makes me think, were they set on their own Earth? I'm not sure.
And you did throw Earth Prime into the mix,
Of course.
earlier on as well.
Exactly. Now,
Yes.
I think I'm right in saying that you spotted in the Crisis Companion, in the big oversized Crisis Infinite Earths hardback, that Earth 12 is allocated.
Yes, for this and the Plastic Man stories as well that we've covered.
Our Twitter pal, Multiverse Historian, he has indicated in the past that he is convinced that Plastic Man and the Inferior 5 are all on Earth 12. The fact that Plastic Man pops up in an Inferior 5 story, in a story that's very much like the sort of, as you said, the whole feel is very much like Plastic Man's comic.
Yes.
We're sort of sitting going, right, so where does this Earth 12 reference come from? Because there's nothing in any of these stories that says Earth 12. I'm digging about. The only possible thing I can find is that there's a series, which I'm not sure if we've decided if we're going to do it yet or not.
It's quite far off anyway. We've got a long time to decide.
Captain Carrot and the Amazing Zoo Crew in the Oz Wonderland War.
Yay.
We might do it because it features Hoppy the Marvel Bunny. We'll see. We'll certainly talk about it more at some point. And the final page, or the final issue of that series, has the Inferior 5 bursting into Captain Carrot's civilian identity. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He's sitting drawing at his desk, whatever. And they all arrive, and it turns out that they're looking for Earth 12, or are we on Earth 12, is this Earth 12, that sort of thing. And I'm wondering if that is the root of people sort of speculating that Earth 12 is the appropriate Earth for the Inferior 5. What's your thoughts on this?
Possibly the origin of the name, Earth 12, but certainly they're definitely on a different Earth.
Yeah.
Mike's Amazing World of Comics is a website that we reference quite a bit, and Mike suggests that they are on Earth 1. But I think the only way this works is if they are on their own Earth with Plastic Man, with a version of Superman, with a version of the Challengers, with a version of Doom Patrol, with a version of all these Marvel heroes, and let's call it Earth 12. That's fine, where anything can happen.
Yeah, I think that's it. Nothing in the Oz Wonderland page to say that they're trying to get home to Earth 12. They might just be trying to get to Earth 12 for a reason because they're on a mission and something happens. But you're right, if we're going to randomly assign a number of an Earth that the Inferior 5 live on, it may as well be Earth 12.
Why not?
There's nothing in the stories to say that they're not on Earth 12. And of course, as we talk about legacy on this podcast, we should also mention the more recent aspect or version of the Inferior 5 that was published by DC in 2019 and 2020. And it was intended, I believe, as a 6-issue miniseries. but it was cancelled after 4 issues, and the trade paperback was published that collected all 6. Now, it doesn't really bear any real relation to the Inferior 5 that we've seen or we've talked about today. It's very Keith Giffen. There's backup strips with Peacemaker, who's flavour of the week at the moment. And the series seems to be sort of set in the wake of the Invasion miniseries from the late 80s. It doesn't really tie in at all, but we're still going to put the covers and the cover of the trade paperback up on the socials.
Yes.
Because content is what it's all about. Have you read that series, Pete, yourself?
I read the first issue and I've got the trade, but I've not actually read it. Not yet.
Maybe if we ever summon up the energy or find an extra 300 hours in every day we do a Patreon, we'll talk about that series.
Maybe.
I'm a big fan of Keith Giffen.
Oh, me too, yes.
He's definitely an acquired taste for me. It took a long, long time for me to sort of develop an appreciation for what he does, but I'm a huge fan. So, and I picked the trade paperback up very recently. Got a copy in Forbidden Planet Glasgow. I'll give it a look at some point. So, yeah.
There's one more appearance in Inferior 5 I want to mention, and that is...
Is there?
Yeah. They appeared in an issue of the revived Brave and Bold title by JMS.
Of course they did. I read it last night. How could I have forgotten?
It's part of a 2-part story. It's a time travel story, and the first part of the story is a team up with the Legion of Superheroes and the Doom Patrol.
The Doom Patrol?
Yes. How very timely. And the Legion of Superheroes.
We should do an episode about the Doom Patrol. Oh, we have, right, so we should do an episode about the Legion of Superheroes. Yes, let's think of an excuse to do the Legion of Superheroes again.
Yes. But in the second issue of that 2-part story, there's a team up between the Legion of Substitute Heroes and the Inferior 5.
That's right, yes, of course.
And it's great fun. They go back to the time of the Inferior 5, and at the end of the story, they kind of bring them forward in time to the present.
Yeah.
And nothing ever happened with it.
I know, that's right, yes, I remember thinking that.
Which is a shame. Such a shame.
I don't know, was JMS setting them up for another ongoing series that he was going to walk away from 3/4 of the way through? Don't know.
Also in the Angel and the Ape miniseries, I think that we mentioned previously when we were talking about the Green Glob who appeared in it, Dumb Bunny appears in that. And
oh, really?
She is related to Angel.
That's interesting. Yes. That's some nice continuity.
Yeah, huh?
So that's probably it for the Inferior 5, unless we think of something else in the next couple of days and I have to record an insert on Dropbox and send it to Peter in the middle of the night.
Again.
Yeah. It's a bit of a red letter day at the Earth 2 podcast, isn't it, Peter?
Yes, we've had our first email.
We've had an email! Nearly 2 years of this and we've finally had an email.
From someone who isn't trying to sell me podcast promotional material. Yes, and it's from listener Alec Bredner. Hi, Alex.
Hello, Alex.
And he says, hello, Peter and David. I've been listening to your podcast since your debut episode, and I keep coming back to it because I really do admire and appreciate the show. I listen to a lot of comic book podcasts, and in my experience, yours is completely unique. Well, that's good to know. While some other sites either touch on the Silver Age or perhaps a character from this period in their regular show, no other podcast covers the ground that you guys do. Your plan to go through the Silver Age issue by issue is an undertaking of monumental proportions, and it reminds me of Dave Sims' task of self-publishing 300 issues of the Cerebus comic book.
We're going to have more than 300 episodes, there's no doubt.
Possibly, yes. Oh, we will, yeah. He succeeded, and I have no doubt that you will as well. Every episode you complete takes you a bit further along this fascinating road. I am a very long-time comic fan, and I was actually collecting some of these Silver Age comics as they were being published. So, when you gentlemen start reading the comic your episode is discussing, I either go into my collection and pull the book out, or, if I don't own the issue, I go onto the net and track down a copy and read the comic along with you while you're both doing the dialogue. This is the part of your podcast that to me is the most fun, and it's obvious from listening to you both that you're totally enjoying yourself with the project.
Most of the time.
Yeah. Some of these Silver Age stories may seem ludicrous or strange to modern readers who have grown up on the deconstructed comic form of storytelling, but their eccentricity is their charm.
Absolutely.
They are from a much simpler comic book time, and they can and should be appreciated on a different level, and the enthusiasm that you both show prove that this can be done in a totally compelling way. So please, guys, keep pushing forward, and rest assured that I will keep listening as long as you keep producing this totally singular podcast. Thank you, Alex.
That's lovely.
That's fantastic.
That's very kind. Thank you, Alex. Yes. Gosh, it's good to know that someone's listening.
Indeed.
And we're not just firing this out into the void. Awesome. So yes, listeners, if you're feeling generous and want to give us some nice, lovely feedback, where can they email us, Peter?
You can email us, like Alex did, at the earth2podcast@gmail.com. Make sure you follow us on social media because we're putting up lots of bonus material for this very episode, and indeed all our episodes. On Facebook and Instagram, we're at the Earth2 Podcast, and on Twitter, we're at podcast_Earth2, and it is the number 2 for all of our sites.
Yep. If you're feeling generous, you could go to our coffee page and buys the price of a beverage. If you're feeling more generous, you could help our algorithms by going to wherever it is that you receive your podcast and leaving a positive, glowing review. That would be lovely. A little different again this week. We've been able to mix it up the last week or two.
Indeed, yes. But what are we going to do next week? Tune in, find out.
Yeah, you'll just have to wait and see what's lined up for next time.
And in that bombshell, on this Inferior episode, I've been Peter.
By definition, yes. Who have I been? I've been David. Amazing. We'll see you soon on
The Earth,
The Earth
2
2
podcast.
Transmatter cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.
Soupy twist.